G'day. So I'm super excited to announce the release of the book. Well, should I say the pre-release? It's taken me 6 years to write it, and to be honest, I could have probably spent another 6 years writing it. It's very difficult when you're writing your life story to come to the point where you say, right, I'm finished now. You just want to continuously improve it, tweak it, and just make it better in every way you can. So I've had to draw the line and I've got it to, I won't say the best of my ability because I could keep going and going, but I've done it the best in the time in the last 6 years, should I say. So chapter one is about before I went in care. Chapter two is when I was in care. It's when you're in a residential children's home, you're living with children from dysfunctional families, and there can be many different reasons for that, whether their parents are in prison, the parents are dead, the parents have abused them, the parents are full-time drug addicts. There's just many different reasons why a child would be in care. And in them sort of environments, there's crimes happening daily. You're just involved in that sort of environment. As a child, you're susceptible to being influenced more at any time in your life, especially to the older kids. So it's an eye opener for somebody who doesn't have any experience with what it's like living in a children's home. Chapter three, in them environments, there's a lot of drugs going on, so I got involved in a lot of drugs. And if you've come from a posh background and you've never done a substance in your life, this will be either really interesting for you, or you'll probably turn your nose up at me. But it talks about my experiences with many different substances. Some people have the idea that all drugs are bad unless they're legal or unless they're prescribed. But just because they're prescribed or they're legal doesn't mean they're good, or doesn't mean they're any better than illegal ones. It can do, it's just you can't just put it in that label. Alcohol's a really bad drug. A lot of prescription drugs. I don't think myself, as a very experienced user, should be prescribed because they're so addictive and they make it, So I give the best of my ability to explain different substances and what effect they have on you, and it's in a metaphysical sense out of this world. Chapter four. This if everybody's seen the film Human Traffic, this is just like that film but messier. Well, a lot messier. So if you haven't seen this film and you're going to buy this book, I recommend you watching that film so you can understand why I've called it Human Traffic, the real deal. Chapter five, I leave care at this time, just at the end of my teenage years, and I get my taxi license. I shouldn't have got it. Pulled a few maneuvers that were quite legal. If we get any officer out there with a vendetta against me, I was exempt, mate. That's my get out clause. Chapter six. So, getting a license, taxi license at the end of my teenage years. I didn't want to be a taxi driver when I was 50. I had more ambition. I was passionate about becoming a taxi driver because I like driving, but when I got it, I wanted to do something else. And because of my experiences in chapter four, I thought I'd set up my own club brand. And this was probably one of the most important chapters of my life because it really built my character. Because at this point, I was really thick. Tim Nice But Dim. It's the best way to describe me. But I was passionate, and I'd spend thousands on DJs, thousands on lights, lasers, dancers, big venues, massive promotion, big lot of security. I wouldn't budget, so every event I was losing thousands, but I refused to give up. And this really was so much of an important part of my life of shaping my character. Chapter seven, at 25, I learned the importance of education. I started reading loads of books, became addicted to education, and I started, well, that's why I call it by Tim. Tim Nice But Dim's going. I set up my own business there, become an entrepreneur, and again, that's down to just improving my intelligence because, well, at that point, I didn't have any. Chapter eight, me being very promiscuous. I won't go into detail now. I'll leave that for your imagination. Uh, Chapter 9, travel the world. This is, I would recommend anybody at any age, well, not any age, but late teenage onwards, to go traveling the world. And I mean to deprived places as well, non-touristy places, because it's a very different experience. You learn culture, you learn so many things that you cannot learn from reading a book. You can't get that experience anywhere else. Um, some people say to me, because I live in a children's home, I've had a hard life. But compared to the some things I've seen across the world, I had a life of deluxe because there is so much, not just injustice, but cruelty around the world. So I'm grateful for what I had. It really opens your eyes. So I'd recommend traveling for anyone. Chapter 10. Now, this is where my journey into corruption, well, discovering corruption, should I say, began. I was helping my friend against police corruption, and then I became the target, and that opened my eyes. That was the beginning of my journey for this. It was a real eye opener because the police, not just the police were corrupt, but the watchdog. They're in bed together. If you make a complaint about the police misconduct, you will see the police watchdog actively covering it up. It's their modus operandi. It really is terrible. We're living in such a corrupt complaint system that it all gets swept under the carpet. Anyone who's made a police complaint will resonate with that. Then chapter 11, I prosecute the chief of police for targeting me for helping my friend. And that's a 10-year fight. It goes, the transcripts show this, like left, right, and centre. You see all the sort of corruption going on. Then chapter 12, I take it to the High Court and I realise, wow, we have such a judicial problem. I mean, there are a few good apples, but we have a rotten bunch who will lie, who will cover stuff up. And I show it in the book. We are living in a really, really corrupt system. There's no accountability whatsoever. They do what they want when they want. Don't take my word for it. Don't take my opinion. You read the facts that I present you and you make your own conclusions. But we are in a real bad state of affairs. And then chapter 11, chapter 13, it's reflecting on my life and trying to inspire other people to live in a passionate life. Most of the decisions I make was because I was passionate about it. And I took that decision because it was what I was motivated by passion, not by money. Don't get me wrong, money is important. I'm not devaluing the importance. We need it to survive, so it is important. But I think being passionate is much more important. So the transcripts will show you how they systematically cover up abuse and misconduct, and how not only the police will do it, but the watchdog, the so-called independent Office of Police Conduct, and the judiciary, all in cahoots in the way that they shut down every complaint, right? So there were 4 investigations by the police. They're all included in the transcripts. This is one of them. As you can see, look, the warrant document itself has not been traced. The warrant document itself has not been traced. All 11 of them have not been traced. Well, the thing is, you can't trace something that doesn't exist, right? That's why they can't trace it, because they never had them in the first place. And when you read this full report, you'll just see how much manipulation and lies the professional standards department go to cover up misconduct. And this isn't just one police force, it's across the country. It's how they operate, right? And then, it's not just the police cover-ups you'll see in the transcripts. You'll see the cover-ups from the Independent Police Complaints Commission. It's changed its name now, but at that time, that was what it's called. Even here, not the brightest tool in the box. If you read how he says it, the available evidence suggests that Mr. Burns was shown the warrants. Right. Well, they don't exist. How can they show him something that doesn't exist? Or at least he had explained to him. Well, that's very different. Explaining someone and showing something is two different things. But here is the contradiction. The investigating officer points out there's no issues regarding lawfulness of warrants. However, the report does not specifically address the issue whether the warrants were shown to your client. So if the investigation doesn't address whether the warrants were shown, how can they say the available evidence suggests that he was shown the warrants? It's just a complete contradiction. But again, you'll see the cover up of the watchdog, and there was 11 appeals, right? That's how long it went on for. 11 appeals. 9 of them were upheld because it put them in a position where they had to uphold it. Not that they wanted to, but you'll see it anyway, the whole progress of how the police watchdog itself is insidious, right? That's my opinion based on factual documents that cover up grave misconduct, cover up crimes. Yeah, and this isn't just a civil thing it's actually criminal behaviour by the police, which the watchdog are complicit. Now, in addition to the police investigations that you get and the IPCC appeals to see how they operate, you've got the actual transcripts of most of the court hearings. And there's a few different hearings with various different judges. Now, this first judge in particular is actually a circuit judge, but he also sits as deputy high court judge. I accuse him at the hearing of falsifying facts, perverting the course of justice, and predetermining his decision. And I don't just make these accusations to him wildly. I present the facts, and I give him. Well, we had a very, very interesting hearing. Put it that way. You will just these transcripts alone. You will take a lot of interest in. So why did I accuse him of perverting the course of justice and falsifying facts? Well, to understand that, we first need to go to one of his decisions, and he made about 8 different decisions in total. If you look here, right, the defendant has admitted I was detained. He was lawfully stopped and detained. And this judge has denied it, saying they contested. Right? So that's why I'm warranted in saying you're falsifying facts. And I'll tell you why he did it, right? Is because everybody knows that the maxim, he who asserts must prove, rests upon the claimant. But that doesn't apply in every case. It can be shifted onto the defendant in certain cases. And false imprisonment is one of those cases where it's on the defendant to justify it in law. It's not on the claimant to prove his case. But that only applies if they've admitted it in fact. So if they deny any detention has taken place, then the claimant must prove it at court. But if the defendants admit it, the burden of proof shifts onto the defendant. Now, what he tried doing was unlawfully reversing that and putting it on me, right? The issue of burden of proof does not apply to this test. It does apply to this test because they've admitted it. But he's falsified facts to shift the burden of proof back onto me. And this is why I accuse him of lying. Because he falsified it. I also accused him of a couple of other things. Having a predetermined decision, right? And I said to him that he shouldn't be making decisions against me while I've got a recusal application against him. He should deal with the recusal application before he starts dismissing my other applications. And then he's like, well, as it turns out, no, because I was right anyway. So it's like, well, so it was prejudged today. And he's like, well, no. I said, well, it must have been because if you knew that you was right anyway, then you've already made the decision. He said, I'm not going to argue with that. And he says, well, okay, I didn't go into that any further, but, the point I was making there is if I've made an application for him to recuse himself, he's purposely ignored the application. He's gone on to make other applications that is dismissed against me, which if he'd have recused himself when I'd first made it, he wouldn't have had the jurisdiction to make them dismissal applications because he's recused himself. So I said he shouldn't have been dismissing my applications before he'd made the recusal application, because if that had succeeded, he wouldn't have had any jurisdiction. And his defence to that was, well, it turns out I was right anyway, but you wouldn't have known you were right until you made the decision, unless it was a predetermined decision. Yeah, that might be complicated, but just rewind that to listen to it to understand the point I'm trying to make there, because it's quite complex. Now, another reason why I said he should recuse himself was because if he ruled in my favour, he would contradict himself. And the reason why is, so I'd made a judicial review about being false imprisonment for one of the cases, and I'd also sued, right? But I made the judicial review first because the police, like they usually do, cover up complaints. And he said there was no misconduct, right? So then I've sued. So if I am successful, which I was in the end, not with this judge, with another judge, but if I'm successful in showing there was false imprisonment, right, it shows that his refusal in my judicial review was all wrong, and he's let an officer get away with false imprisonment, right? So I said, well, he's obviously got a biased decision because if he rules in my favour, he's going to look like a dick, basically, right? And he says, however, a fair-minded bystander knew I had no recollection of the previous two hearings, right? He's saying he doesn't remember me from the two hearings before, right? So he can't have been biased. He can't have any because he had no amnesia. He couldn't remember anything that had happened before in the two previous hearings. So he can't have had any bias towards me. Um, and he's saying that he's not got a predetermined judgment because of that, and that's not the reason why he falsified the facts. He falsified the facts because it must have been, if he did, which he didn't admit, it's a genuine mistake, and it had nothing to do with the fact that he had amnesia from the last two. But anyway, I'm not going into it all now. There's pages and pages of me arguing with him about all this, which is one of the part of the transcripts. Now, in the same case, but with a different judge, we get more lies. So one of the prosecutions, the malicious prosecutions that I was subjected to, when it had its first case management hearing at the magistrates, um, I showed that it was malicious and that there was no grounds for it. And the magistrates give the police prosecution an opportunity to discontinue, right? Um, the CPS hadn't taken over by then because there's a small minor offence and they take over on me at trial. And I made a data subject access request, and the CPS confirmed that they had nothing to do with the initial prosecution on the decisions. They only got involved at the day of the trial, which they offered no evidence because there wasn't any evidence, right? And they said we need any copies of the paperwork, contact North Yorkshire Police, right? So come from the horse's mouth, nothing to do with CPS, the decision to prosecute me, entirely the police. Even the Northallerton Magistrates Court said the same thing here. This is, as you say, gave the police prosecution time to consider whether to proceed with the case. So it was 100% the police, right? Now, when I cross-examined the police officers, which is part of the transcripts, you'll see me interrogating them. I was ruthless, and I just proved them to be liars. So at the end, they had no basis to say that they justified the prosecution against me. So very last minute, their barrister changed the whole situation. He said nothing to do with us. It was the CPS who prosecuted me. Right at the very end, right. So bear in mind, We've got the court saying it was the police who made the decision. We've got CPS saying nothing to do with us. Then we get the High Court judge lying to cover up for him, saying, I accept Mr. Thomas' submission, which was very at the end, that the decision would have been effectively won for the CPS. So this is the High Court lying, right? There's no other word for it, right? Because before she said this, I pointed her to this, pointed to that. There was no basis for her to say she made a mistake here. Just no basis. Just a complete lie, right? Now, you'll see lies throughout this case. The judges, the police, the IPCC, all in cahoots, right? But this is the transcripts of the judgment, right? So you get that, you get all the other judgments, but the cross-examination is the best one for me. Now, there's various officers who are cross-examined, and I'll put them on now. So one of them was the prosecutor, right? Which my interrogation of her showed her to be just, it showed her up, right? She just contradicts herself over and over again. So I said to her, were you made aware of any police complaints I made? Right. So I'm saying, they prosecuted me because of these complaints. And she's like, no, no, no. How many times does she say no, 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 no? Like, she never knew about any of my police complaints. So her decision to prosecute me had nothing to do with the police complaints because she never knew. And, confirmed it, confirmed it, confirmed it. All that. However, she'd said previously in further up here, I won't go into it because it's, I want to save it with transcripts, that she read the MG6 form, right? She testified that. But she even admits it here. Look there. Now, so then I called her out. Said, so it's fair to say that you basically, these proceedings weren't the first time you heard about my complaint because you read it when you read the MG6. It's like, yes. So you've just point blank lied to me 5 times in a row before until I mentioned that the MG6 form had the complaint which you said you'd considered, and therefore you would now admit that actually it wasn't the first time you knew about the complaint and you knew it when you made the prosecution, contrary to what you said about 5 times earlier. Now here I say to her, so when you make your decision to prosecute, does the Crown Code for prosecutors apply? And she's like, no. It's because she's a police prosecutor, not Crown prosecutor. So then I'm saying, okay, minute, so you're testifying that the code doesn't apply to you. So, well, I may be mistaken. Oh, well, do you want to retract that then? Well, I'm not sure. I'll have to. Maybe I'll retract. I'm not sure. Yeah, just changing her mind left, right, and centre. And I do this to her throughout the interrogation, and I catch her out on various things. It's an interesting read to see how police officers will commit perjury to save their reputation. Now, throughout the trial, I just kept discrediting the police officers by showing that they just weren't giving a truthful account of what had happened. Their barrister realised he had to do something because his witnesses were dropping like flies. So what he did was he got one of the officers to testify to something that wasn't in his statement to try and ambush me. Now, he realised that I'd got him on the paperwork because the previous cross-examination, which you'll see in the transcripts, that I'd got them on the fact they'd not done a public interest from a prosecution, they'd not shown that the evidence was satisfied to justify the prosecution. No one had authorised the prosecution. And he was like, he needs to do something. So what he did was, right, he asked the officer to testify, right, that he did the MG6, right? That's very important. Did you complete this? Yes. Complete lie. 100% lie, yeah? So this was because they realised that after I took out their first witness, they were in a bit of trouble, and that I was coming for the rest of them. And with documents like this, they just didn't have anything to support their justifications. So these are done by prosecutors, right? But they realised that their prosecutors were now in trouble, and when I was going to cross-examine them, they had no reply. So what they were trying to do was trying to get this officer to say that he did it. So what he was doing was he was sacrificing this officer to save the bacon of the prosecutor, right? That was the intention of this lie. Well, this set me up great, right? Because when I cross-examined him, yeah, I knew that he was lying. I went to set him up because the barrister had got him to lie to protect the prosecutor. Now, he'd radioed through for some advice and he said he couldn't remember what the advice was. And I said, do you have any medical conditions for this lack of memory? He says, no. Right? He said, well, this was done in 2019. I said, right, okay. So do you remember the misconduct complaint I made against you? I wasn't aware of it. Yeah. So this says, you wasn't aware of it? No, not until this, this trial, 2019. So I'm saying, he wasn't aware I made complaint against you or about any other person. Not the recall now. So he's saying 2019 was the first time he became aware of the complaint I'd made against him, and it was because of these proceedings, right? Now, if you remember rightly, he'd got him to lie by saying he was the author of the MG6 form, right? So he was the author, but he wasn't aware of the complaint until 2019. Yet the author of the MG6 knew about the police complaint because he says the only reason why I made a police complaint was because I was trying to detract attention away from my own criminality. So he's like discrediting me, saying I'd only made a complaint against him to try and, discredit him because I was the criminal. And he said this in 2014. Now he said he was the author of this, but yet under cross-examination, he said he didn't know about it until 2019. So he just throughout this cross-examination, I mean, what this document's 45 pages long. This is just one of the cross-examinations. There was four of them. Yeah, I must have caught him out about 6 different times with different inconsistencies. It was brilliant. It was like at the end of it, he was shaking it a lot. It was great. So this officer, no credibility whatsoever. Now, the extent that the police went to was, well, how big the extent is, I don't know, but it was significant. So they were spying on me to the point where, if I had a shit, they'd know how big that turd was. And, so I asked my internet providers and mobile providers, can you tell me the requests that you've had from the police to spy on me, my phone, internet, and all that sort of stuff, right? And Virgin said to me, get in touch with them, right? Because I wanted to talk to me about my request. Talk weren't as helpful, but they said, unless we get a court order, we're barred from Ripper from disclosing any requests made by the police. Now, some of the information in the transcripts alongside these letters, I showed the judge, and the judge was going to make an order for disclosure. So she was going to order Talk, Virgin, and Utility Warehouse to disclose any requests that the police had made to spy on me. Now, the reason why I asked for that was the police barrister had argued that my claims under the Human Rights Act were barred by time limitation because you have to make them within 12 months. And those particular claims are over 12 months old. And I'd said that, because of the spying and for reasons you'll see in the book, that I couldn't make the claims within 12 months old. And if she made a disclosure order, it would show the amount of spying that they did on me. And as a result of the judge going to make the order, their solicitors then said, okay, we will now withdraw our limitation. Defense, as such, there's no need for disclosure. So what they did was they sacrificed a valid defense, it was over 12 months old, to prevent information coming out to how much they were spying on me. That's the only reason why they withdrew a valid defense, because the judge was going to order disclosure to be compatible. So I could see, because they weren't just spying on me, they were spying on my family, my associates, all sorts. And, they didn't want this coming out. So they sacrificed their defense. But again, you'll see it all in the book. So the transcripts edition is just jam-packed of hundreds and hundreds of pages on top of the book that support all the claims I make with evidence to show what I'm saying is an actual fact. Obviously, I've got my own opinions, which people can disagree with or agree with, but the claims I make are supported by evidence. And, it shows that our police is corrupt. The police watchdog is corrupt. The courts is so horrendously corrupt. It's an epidemic, right? And the best way I can describe it is the book itself is supposed to inspire you to live a passionate life, but it's not just about corruption. That's just one part of my journey. Yeah. But the difference between the book and the transcripts is the book is entertainment. The transcript is educational. If you want to learn about the system, how bad it is, and how to navigate it through it, how to become better, how to watch out for these techniques, these strategies they use to defend yourself, then you need the transcripts, because that will give you the information and the techniques. It shows you the strategies I use as well, so you can take away them and you can use them for yourself. So you're not just learning information, you're actually obtaining strategies so you can use them for yourself and help defend you. Finally, if you want to pre-order the book, go over to findyourpassion.pro. You've got 6 different options there. There's 3 options of the book: ebook, hard copy, or transcript. You can also add on a seminar ticket. So the difference being, the book is about what I did, the seminar is about how I did it. The transcripts is the evidence of what I did. So there's a nuance there, but you can see if you want to learn how I did it, then the seminar is the best option for you. If you just want to read about what I did and the results, that's the transcripts. And if you just want entertainment, then just buy the normal edition. It's all very dependent on what you're looking for. The seminar, I go into a lot more detail with my other cases. So the book is about police corruption. Well, part 3 of the book, should I say, and AOPC corruption and judicial corruption, in covering it up. But with the seminar, I talk about many other different public bodies: the Information Commissioner, the Bar Standards Board, the commissioners. There's a lot more variations, because I've done a lot more than just challenging police misconduct. And whilst they have different powers, there's a similarity of the way that they will abuse them and cover their tracks. So it's like drawing the dots together. You start to see patterns between the way that all these oversight bodies operate. So the seminar will go into great detail with how I did things and how to teach you. Obviously, you can meet Mike Line like-minded people, and there'll be a lot of Q&A questions at the end for anybody wanting answers to something they're not sure of. So it's on sale now, and if you want to join the Facebook group, you can see it in the description in the link below. Have a nice day.